Hello, I suggest we start. Welcome everyone. We are meeting many of you not for the first time, but some of you are coming here for the first time, maybe because they're attracted from the up-to-date topic. I give the floor to Mr. Огнян Zlатев, the chairman of the European Commission in Sofia, to open this conference. Hello from me. As Olga said, we have met some of you on similar events, occasions, and to other conferences. It is truly joyful that we are here together, especially in such interesting times. These are revolutionary times, not only in translation, but in the direction that the European Union is developing, and this affects our work. But in order to be able to respond to these revolutionary changes that are around us, we have to be at the height of the new requirements towards all of us. I'm convinced that what you're going to hear today will be interesting and useful to you. I had only one question: why the R in the title is in brackets, so it's not too scary. I think that we can speak about revolution directly because of the way you work and are you going to work for the future. And I dare to join your community is much more revolutionary, and maybe it won't have anything to do with everything that existed 10 to 15 years before. Wishing you all the best and a successful conference. I just want to make an organizational announcement. You know that we live in an interesting times, as I already said, and today the two greatest trade unions decided to make during the lunch break, I will suggest you to stay in this building because it will be quite complicating with entering and so that other people might come. I suppose that they will finish around 2. Their protest most likely will finish about 2 o'clock. I hope they won't be very noisy, so they won't interfere with your work and your break. Once again, thank you. Welcome to Klaus. Thank you. Maybe this is the 8th conference. We don't count them very conscientiously, but this is the first one where we have a director of our directorate. In the written translation directorate, the languages are separated in 4 different groups, and Mr. Klaus Майер-Кукен is the director of Direction A, where his Bulgarian language is, together with 6 other groups. I give the floor to Mr. Клаус Майер-Кукен to welcome our conference.
Уважаемые госпожи и господа.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conference dedicated to the neuromachine translation. For me, it's an honor and pleasure to be among you and to welcome you on the behalf of the General Directorate Written Translation in European Commission.
This is not machine translation. This is not machine translation, and my Bulgarian language skills stop here. So and I will continue in English. Dear Professor Koeva, dear Ognian, dear Olga, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here at the opening of today's conference. It's a great honor for me. Thank you, Ognian, for hosting it and for your kind words of welcome. And I would like to extend a special thanks to the colleagues from the Bulgarian Language Department in the European Commission, in particular its head of department, Ms. Manavova, and her field officer, Desislava Krusteva. I don't know where she is. Yes. So thank you for organizing this conference in close cooperation with the Bulgarian Language Institute at the Venerable Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. And in this context, I would also like to thank personally Professor Koeva for the excellent cooperation with my colleagues in Luxembourg and in Sofia. Now allow me to say a few words, first of all, about the conference in general, and secondly, about its title. Conferences of this kind are not a novelty. Since 2010, our Bulgarian translation department has been bringing together national experts and language professionals in the context of the Bulgarian Language Network. The idea behind the network is to provide a platform for cooperation and exchange for Bulgarian authorities and the European translation services to meet and to discuss matters of common interest in the fields of linguistics and terminology. All of this with a noble goal to achieve and to maintain the highest level of quality in the translation of EU legislation into Bulgarian, which is essential for the functioning of our union on the ground. 8 years ago, the Bulgarian department was confronted with a need to establish systematic cooperation with the national authorities and the academic world in Bulgaria in order to achieve convergence on terminological issues and to receive input and support to its translation efforts. Over time, these annual events of the Bulgarian Language Network have become what we now consider to be a good tradition. Events with topic which reflect the challenges that the department has been facing since the beginning. Topics like legal translation, terminology in all the sectors of EU policy and EU action, or the correction of errors in the EU's legislative texts, errors which, I dare say, are somehow inevitable if we consider the magnitude of our operations. The Bulgarian department translates every year around 80,000 pages of mostly legislative texts, often under very high time pressure. At the same time, the network has given the department a great opportunity to establish strong and lasting contacts with all important players in matters related to your beautiful language. Now on the title, the theme of this year's conference echoes new technological developments that are affecting the translation industry as a whole and across the world. The introduction and a constant and rapid improvement of neural machine translation systems, or NMT systems in short. I personally cannot assess the quality of text translated with the help of NMT into Bulgarian because I don't speak your language. But I do not cease to be myself deeply impressed when I see translation results for language combinations that I do know. And that only seems to be a beginning. Of course, there are big differences between the systems that are available for commercial purposes. Think of Google Translate, DeepL, or Tilde, which provide really usable and useful results for text of a more general nature. This on the one hand, and on the other hand, the more domain and text type oriented systems like e-translation that the European Commission has been developing over the last couple of years. I believe that you or some of you have had an opportunity to see and test our system at work. It's a system that has been financed by a program of the European Union called Connecting Europe Facility, automated translation for the EU Council presidency. It was deployed for Bulgarian at the beginning of this year, and when your country, i.e. when your country took the presidency of the EU. If some of you have used it already, I would like to hear your views in the break. And we can have a little discussion. What do you think of it? If you haven't seen it yet, I can give you the links also in the breaks. Now, machine translation has prompted, from its earliest days, a lot of controversy, based on the premise that one day it might be so good that it can fully replace human translation. Personally speaking, I do not see this happen anytime soon, if ever, because translation for me is an intellectual activity that requires human knowledge and, most importantly, human judgment. Transposing a text from one language to another, from one culture to another, with all the differences and nuances between them, is not like playing chess.
До година ще.
In my view, human input will always be needed, both for the development of the algorithms and for the control of the output of machine translation. At the same time, I would slightly nuance the answer to the question of replacement. It all depends on the type and purpose of the text to be translated. If I want to consult a website in Bulgarian or find my way in China or Japan without any knowledge of the language in question, I'll be happy to get that information through the machine without human intervention. If, however, we think of the type of text that we translate at the Commission, namely legislation, we cannot imagine, even with a really long-term perspective, that we would leave the translation exclusively to the machines without any human intervention or control. Or would you put full trust in a machine-supported operation on parts of your body without a surgeon controlling the process and the outcome? So for certain purposes or applications, the replacement of the human translator by the machine is already a reality. For others, I'm not convinced it will ever be. So to come back to the title, are we witnessing a revolution or an evolution? My personal conviction is that perhaps at the beginning of it all, it looked like a revolution. But the reality on the ground tells us that it is now rather a gradual evolutionary process, with sometimes smaller steps and sometimes larger jumps, as we're currently witnessing with NMT. When I started my career in the translation service of the European Commission in 1991, I had to dictate my translations into a dictaphone, a recording device with a handheld microphone. And secretaries would type my oral translations. The translation process then happened exclusively, really exclusively in our brains, every time starting from scratch. At that time, we could not copy and paste bits and pieces of existing translations as we do since we've started using the first computer-based translation systems with memories. That was in the early 90s, so around the time I started, of the last century, so it's a while ago. And it was indeed a revolution at that time. But since then, both the applications using translation memories and machine translation have rather undergone a steady evolution. And they will continue to do so. At the same time, we will use our translator brains and skills less and less frequently for translating a text from scratch. We will use them much more for revising what the applications in the form of translation memories or machine translation offer us. Is that a good or a bad development for our translators? I wouldn't make a judgment here, but simply say that it is a development that we have to embrace and to adapt to. It also has its advantages. The more reliable the systems become, the more they will speed up the translation process itself, leaving more time for research and for quality control. Because, as we all know, time is money, and in translation, deadlines are as important as quality. Machine translation in its various permutations, rules or grammar-based to start with, statistical, now neural, has been hyped, perhaps overhyped for many years. But now we see more and more useful results that will, I'm convinced, benefit our translators. So the question for me is not whether a human translator will ever be replaced, but how the two systems, the human being and the machine, can efficiently work together to produce optimal results in terms of speed and quality. I look forward to the presentations announced for today, as I'm sure that they will make important contributions to the debate on the state of play of neural machine translation and on the outlook for the future. I wish us all a very interesting and fruitful day. Благодаря ви за вниманието.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Аз искам да направя няколко...
I would like to make a few
practical clarifications concerning today's agenda. You see the cameras. Our conference is directly broadcasted on the YouTube channel of the DG Written Translation. And as we have been assured, still not broadcasted, but will be broadcasted soon. Currently, it is at Facebook, and on YouTube, it stays there forever. And as long as there is YouTube, you can use this presentation that you will hear today later on, or maybe show them to your colleagues. At the same time, this is also valid for the conference which was held just 1 year ago in Sofia. It is still accessible on the YouTube channel, so some of you that are interested in making some comments from last year's conference can do this. The next presentation is also in English. We have not envisaged translation from English to Bulgarian, but there will be Bulgarian-English translation. You can ask your questions to the lecturers both in Bulgarian and in English to your convenience. They have headphones and they can hear your question translated into English. We have verbal translators. This is what I had to share with you as technical specifications. So now we continue with the presentations. Our chief guest, main lecturer for the night, is Mr. Kристиан Айзолд from the Burns Language Consulting Company in Germany. We asked him to make an overview of the development of the machine translation, its features and characteristics. I admit that over all these years, when we came here to Bulgaria, we have been using machine statistical translation. And most of the time I did not focus on this topic because most of our users from the state administration, most of the time they feel that most of the translation has been done by machines, not by human beings. Now is the time to tell them how we use machines because they are already used in Bulgaria. And what already Klaus mentioned in his speech, the portal which was uploaded for the presidency of Bulgaria of the Council of the European Union, with the help of the machine translation. There were some publications in the press and some of the users tried to translate phrases from Bulgarian classical texts. The attempt of machine translation is not to translate classical literature texts, but we do have successful stories, and you would hear them at the end of the day, which are here at the European Union and among other institutions. So now we have to start with the machine translation, and I give the floor to Mr. Kристиан Айзолд for his presentation.
So I hope I get this to work here.
Искам да кажа, който не вижда добре екран.
I would just like to add that if you do not see the slides very well on the screen, you can move on to the first two rows, which are still empty.
Okay. Yeah. At first, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's an honor for me to speak so in front of you people, and this is the second time I speak in front of the GGT. The first time was in Luxembourg for the terminologists, and this was a very special lecture on terminology integration into MT and NMT. And today I want to give you a broad overview on NMT, its technology and its possibilities, so that you can, with a critical eye, say which wheels in the process have to be optimized for a better understanding or for good NMT, so that you know what has to be done to have good NMT, and also what are the problems with NMT. So this is the aim. My name is Kристиан Айзолд. I work for a consultancy agency in Düsseldorf, Germany, and basically we optimize translation processes and workflows in bigger or middle-sized companies. And I have to do with MT training and evaluation at Bern's Language Consulting, and I also do lectures like this here. And I hope you will enjoy it. And I want to thank you again for the invitation. So just a little, I hope this works, yeah. Just a little bit on our company. So as I said, we optimize translation workflows. This is my boss. This is Kerstin Berns. She introduced MT at the Daimler company around 10 years ago. And we believe in the optimized language process and the perfect process, you can say. We do that by testing systems of language vendors. And the main point is we are independent. So we don't depend on other agencies or vendors. So we are objective in this way. These are some of our customers. So it's all about translation management systems, terminology management systems, MT systems, and the like. So let's start with the history of MT. Grab my drink. As you may know, all started with rule-based machine translation around the late 60s. And the idea was to mimic human language understanding and production and the human lexicon and the human mind. This was done by big glossaries and handcrafted rules. And these are some of the vendors and companies involved in the first RBMT systems and the late RBM systems till now. Also, there is the ECMT, the European Commission Machine Translation, which was rule-based in the beginning. And as you know, it has switched with all the other companies, or with company like, to modern versions of MT. The rule-based paradigm was obsolete when, not obsolete, but there was a paradigm shift when PCs, personal computers, became more powerful and big amounts of text were accessible via the internet. So you could train MT systems in the corpus paradigm. So this means you just provide the machine with big amounts of translated text, and the machine itself gets the rules and the probabilities out of the text it becomes. This is the main difference. RBMT, it's handcrafted rules and linguistic rules. SMT, statistical machine translation, is about statistics and the probability to have a certain translation for your sentence. So it all is based, or most of the systems are based on Moses, which is a framework for statistical machine translation. And also the European Commission switched to this paradigm with MT at EC. NMT came into play around 4 or 5 years ago when a few papers on NMT were in the scientific community, and it was like an explosion. And in the years after, there were huge amounts of scientific papers on this, and now we have almost every vendor switched to this paradigm because it speaks for itself. There's very good translation, as you may know, but also problems which we will discuss. And e-translation is the European Commission's system for NMT now. This is the landscape of MT today. So we see on the right side there are a couple of NMT vendors with Systron. It started with RBMT, switched to SMT and NMT, and this is the paradigm to go now for most of the vendors. This is just a short overview of what SMT's approach is like. Just keep in mind here that SMT was based on a translation model which has probabilities of phrase translations. And there's also a language model. A language model has probabilities for sequences of words. And this is a big difference to the NMT paradigm, because you don't have in SMT you have single phrases and translation probabilities. In NMT you look at whole sentences. This is the main difference. And there are two words, it's accuracy and fluency. These are very important in evaluating MT systems, because accuracy says if the meaning is transported into the translation, and fluency says is it readable like a human produced sentence. Keep that in mind. So in SMT we basically have phrase tables. It's just a physical, it's a file where all these translation probabilities are stored. So you see you have discrete probabilities for discrete phrases. In Europa, which is the German for in Europe, you have these probabilities. So, and if you want to translate a sentence here in with the SMT paradigm, you have a translation model that gives you certain probabilities for a translation. I hope this sentence in Bulgarian is correct. I don't know. It's machine translated. Is it correct? Oh. Okay. Oh, this is good, because this is intended to be so. We could translate this as he throws the dog's bone, which has a certain probability by its translation probabilities and the language model probability. But there's also interpretation B, he throws the dog bone. And if you ask an SMT model, which is more likely, you have to ask the language model. It's more likely that the model has seen throws the dogs something than throws the dog. A few people throw a dog. So the language model A would have been responsible for the bigger probability of the first sentence. Okay. Just keep that in mind. So we go to neural networks. I came up with an example to illustrate what neural networks are about. MT in general is about classification. We have a source word or a source sequence of words, and we want to know what is the most probable sequence of target words in the target language. And this is all by classification. We have features and combinations of features. So let's look at this example. We have a couple of situational features like the weather conditions, it's sunny or rainy, and the friends are, let me start with, you're a little boy or a little girl, and you want to know what to do with your spare time. You have your friends that are available for you or not this day, and you have pocket money or not, and the weather conditions are sunny or rainy. And now you have to choose on your spare time activity, which is video games or swimming. And we assume that you have already video games, and but swimming is a public pool, and you have to pay for it. This is the condition. So assume it is sunny, your friends are available, and you have pocket money. You go swimming. This could be a real-life example. You've done, based on these features, a special activity, and you say, okay, this is a situation, so and so on. You have data on this situation. Another situation could be your friends aren't available. The rest is the same. Oh, so you go swimming because you have pocket money and it is sunny. When your friends are available and you don't have pocket money, you can't go swimming, so you have to play video games. The fact that it's sunny may not play a big role here. It could be rainy and your friends are there and you have pocket money, but you play video games. Because it rains. You don't want to go swimming in a public open pool when it rains. If your friends are available or not, may not play a big role here. You also play video games. If it's rainy and your friends are there and you don't have pocket money, you play video games. If it rains, you play video games. So if you look at these examples, you already have a feeling and you know what are the crucial features here. What would it be here? What's your suggestion? It's the weather. It's the weather condition, if it rains or not. That's correct. And this is what it's all about. There's a connection between the feature rainy and video games here. If you map this idea to words, you have a good idea what NMT is about. There are connections between these features. And the more connections are tangled here by these features, the more likely they are. And this has to be learned by bilingual texts. So we have an example with our words here, and these are our input nodes. It's also called an input layer, and this is connected to another layer. This is the hidden layer, because there are a lot of nodes. There can be a lot of nodes between the input sentence and the output sentence. Called these nodes in the middle are the hidden nodes and the output nodes, which represent the target sentence. As I said, it's all about the weightings and the connections of the weightings of connections between these nodes. You can say that a fully trained NMT engine has found optimized weightings between all these connections. And here you see the difference to SMT. SMT would have had a probability for the phrase John likes and likes Maria. In NMT, all these single features, all the input words, have an impact on the target words. So you can say in the end, which impact has John on the emission of a word like Maria? Not so. SMT would have had this probability, but in NMT, all the features on the input side play a role. There's a state of the sentence. And the tricky thing with NMT is you can have more hidden layers. And this is because you want to have layers of abstraction. You don't have direct connections between words in a language. There are rules between this, and these rules are there is an understanding of NMT on these rules. We can say how the networks get to this understanding, but somewhere between input and output layer, there is happening magic. And this is the abstraction on hidden nodes, because weightings come together there, and it decides on the importance of certain connections there. But we can't know what's happening there. And this is the big backdraft, the big problem with a black box approach like this. So we talked about the nodes, which are called neurons, because it mimics the human brain, and these are just nodes in a network, and they are linked to a activation function, which we will see later on. I said there are layers. Keep in mind, the more layers you have, the deeper the network is. This is why we call it deep learning. There can be 5 or 10 or more layers and more levels of abstraction. Then on the input side, this is the encoder. It converts the sentence to a machine-readable form. And the decoder, it converts machine-readable representations into a target sentence. And this is because words are presented like vectors in NMT, so that the machine can make reckoning with them. And this is a very interesting feature of this model. You may wonder, how do we come to this representation, to these vectors? What meanings go into these vectors? If you have a few sentences like this, John likes Maria, John loves Maria, or John adores Maria, you see that the context is always the same. And just by the context, these models can learn that there's a connection between these verbs here. And if you think a step further, you can say, if you have a sentence like, men like to drink, and a king is a man, you could also say, kings like to drink, because you have the information on this. If you have the data that keep that information. In the end, it's the approximation of certain words in this vector space, which brings meaning together. So you can say you have verbs like love, like, adore, or see, look, view, and they are all connected somehow. And this is what the system learns by itself. You don't have to say that there is a connection. You just give the system the data and it knows it. And this is very interesting. Provided with a special text, and based on this text, you could say here that a businessman is a rich male, and a waitress is a poor female, and a policeman is a poor man. Yeah. So, and this is what the system gets from the data, because it has seen data where this holds true. This is astonishing. But also, you have to take it with a grain of salt, as you see here. You may wonder how the training process of NMT is. What do we need for training NMT? We need resources, a certain technology, a method, and I will talk on domain adaptation here. This, for me, it's the most interesting part on all that, because you want to know how can I translate specific themes here. I don't want to translate general language. I want to translate specific language. So the resources for NMT training You need way more data than for SMT training. Well, the ratio 1 to 10 is just an example here. It depends on the system. There may be systems where you have around 200,000 sentences and they are sufficient for a good NMT. But if you have very special data and just few of it, it may not be sufficient. So the more really good data you have, the better. If you have lots amounts of bad data, they won't help you. So good MT vendors like DeepL, which is from Germany, has just big amounts of good data. So the frameworks the vendors use aren't so different in the end. It's data. It's all about data. And where come these data from? Can come from your own internal text that you have written here. It can be text from the MT vendor. Nearly every vendor has the possibility to add text to your own text so that you have a critical mass for NMT training. It depends on the domain, if there is data at the MT vendor or not. If it's a very special domain, there may be no text from the MT vendor. Also, of course, there could be free text from the internet. Free to grab them as long as you don't, data security. And you can buy text already translated and very good text in the internet. And you have to know, okay, is it my domain or not? And there's another feature that is often used for low resource languages. It's called back translation. If you don't have a target text in your language, you just translate the text in the other direction. So you have synthetic data. So you get new text by machine translation. So with this approach, there are other problems you may know. It has to be good in the end, but it's a method that is used widely to generate new data by machine translation for training machine translation. As long as these texts are aligned, like in TMX files or Euromis, so it's perfectly good. So most of all of the systems can deal with TMX and aligned data. If you don't have aligned data, like in HTML or text files, you have to align them, and this may be a tricky process, and manual work has to be done here. Let's speak about technology. There are around 10 or up to, I don't know, 20 frameworks on NMT, which mostly are open source. So there's a community working on it, and they get better and better. So MT vendors have to switch to certain frameworks from time to time to keep up with the development here. So if you have chosen your framework, this is just one part of the story. Another is which parameters I choose for my framework. There are lots of parameters you set in before NMT training. So you have tokenizer parameters, training parameters, and all the combinations of parameters here. And you can imagine that it takes a long time to optimize such a system. So you have to train a system with these parameters, then evaluate the system, and if it's not good, you have to change the parameters or change your database, and then you have to train it again. That's the workflow to an optimized MT. Just a short on the mathematics of training NMT networks. As I said, you have an input layer which is connected to other layers by these connections and certain weightings. These weightings could be random in the beginning. You just set a random number there, and it's weighted. And if you have an input from a node, it gets this weighting, and all these weighted inputs go into a sum function, and so there is a sum of these inputs, and there comes a logistic function, and in the end, there's a threshold. And it says, is the output node activated or not? And that should mimic the human neural system, you can say. So, and then the inputs are compared to the expected output. If the output doesn't meet the expectation, the error is given back to the inputs. The weightings are adjusted, and this goes so long until we get the expected output. So that's just a little bit on the method here. This is what I said here. You measure errors, you pass back these errors, and then you repeat until the system is optimized. And this is the whole MT workflow, or the standard workflow, I would say. On the input side, or at the beginning, you have texts, and you have to pre-process them. You have to extract the sentences. You have to align them. Maybe you have to clean them up, because there are errors or formatting errors in this. And if you have clean data, you can train your MT system, and you come to an optimized MT system by this evaluation and optimization circle. So you need a test set of texts to evaluate this. You have to say how good operates my machine on this test set. So if it has good results, maybe your machine is good. And of course, there's pre-editing to text. If you have bad source text that go into translation, you maybe have to apply a sort of controlled language here, so that the engine understands your phrases. You can also achieve this before training if you use controlled language and guidelines and software to produce good training texts. So you have to start from the beginning. What do I have to do that MT training texts are applicable to MT? So let's get to domain adaptation. You can ask questions if you like in between. Domain adaptation. What it is about. We have general systems like Google or so, but they are not sufficient if we want to translate specific texts, maybe. And assume we have law and transportation and marketing texts here. So we can take all these texts from a single domain and put it in one engine. So and hope this engine will translate all the stuff I would like to translate. But we have a problem here. As long as these texts you want to translate are very domain specific, it may be okay. But when general language comes into play, which comes into play in every text type, then you have to think on how do I get general texts or general translations into my engine. So we want to have an engine that correctly translates domain-specific and general language. So the first intuitive approach would be, I take a generic engine, I take my specific text, then I train a model, and I have my engine. The problem with this is so-called overfitting. What can happen here is that the general data, and especially the terminology in this data, is so overwhelming that it dominates the other data. So there aren't enough examples in the specific data so that the right terminology would be chosen. And also keep in mind, if you want to train MT systems, you have to train one engine per language pair and language direction. You need 2 engines for English-Bulgaria and Bulgarian-English, and also for the domains. So this is the standard approach on MT engine training. Yeah, you see it. So I made the generic data bigger here, so you see it's overfitting here. There's another. Nmt has the advantage that you can train it in sequences. You can train an epoch, and this means you let the whole data you have goes through the training process one time. This is one epoch. You can do this several times until the engine is optimized. So maybe you have 1 to 50 epochs on a general engine. So this is your general data, and you train it, you train it, you train it. But at a certain step in the training process, you take specific data, so that the machine adapts to this specific data, and it gets important for it. So in the end, you have a generic engine with a priority for specific language. But you are on the safe side if you want to translate generic engine. So this is what can be done. There are also other approaches to domain adaptation. There's the possibility that you tag your sentence with maybe with a language pair. You could train a multi-language engine, provided that you tag sentences with a language tag. If you say this is a German sentence, this is a Bulgarian sentence, put it in the engine. For translating, you have to put these tags on the sentences. So the engine knows, okay, this is a German sentence. I have to find my German notes here. And you can also do this with domains. You can have texts from the law and tag it with LAE, that is wrong, law, and also patents maybe, or transportation, and put it in one engine. Provided that you know in which domain you want to translate, you tag your sentence with these domain tags, and the engine hopefully gets the right domain. So you can have different engines with a priority of different specific domains. And there's also another possibility to do domain adaptation. Imagine you have a sentence that is related to law that you can't translate correctly with a generic engine. You could give all your translation memories, which are domain specific, to the system, and then there is a pattern matching. So they take the sentence and look at similar sentences in all the translation memories, and hopefully it gets all the sentences that have to do with law in this example. So, and from these sentences, a new little corpus of a few sentences, maybe 50 sentences, 10 sentences, and this engine, this corpus is used to specify the generic engine, and this goes in seconds. So you have a real-time translation with this approach, and in the end, you hopefully get a sentence that has to do with law here, and the right translation. And Nmt enables also live adaptation to user input. The example here is the LILT tool. You may know. Who knows the tool? Wow, it's one person. So this is interesting because Nmt enables here to change suggestions of user inputs depending on the context. And also it completes user input, which is called predictive Mt. So Mt changes with your input and gives you continuation of your sentence based on your written words. And in the end, your inputs, which are very user or domain specific, go back into the engine. So the engine in time adapts to your input. This is a little example. I don't know if I can play it here. You see a little play button there, maybe. You can see this example on Lil's site. Yeah, this is. So there's a specific translation for the French Les Rivières, and it adapts to your translation of this. So the next time you want to translate this word, the Mt engine suggests. Sorry, so there's a suggestion for it, and so this is astonishing because it helps you to helps your workflow and to be more productive in this way. You think this is a good idea? You're very skeptic. You can see examples on this at the Lil site. It's very interesting. So we talked about possibilities of Nmt, what it is capable of, and how it can help us to be maybe more productive and do fast translations with CAT tools like this. But there are also problems of it and other benefits, which will I go to here again. If you compare SMT to NMT, you see there are advantages, like the morphology and inflection is good. You won't have much morphology errors in NMT. And also it's very fluent because of its context awareness. It somehow knows what you want to translate if it has enough data. Word order is correct mostly, and yeah, so compared to SMT, there are much advantages. But SMT is robust to certain errors. I won't go into detail here, but you can. You have to take care of your data. If you have single or if you have a certain amount of errors in your data, SMT may just ignore them somehow. Depends on the. Usually you don't have a certain kind of error in a very consistent way. But if you have a few errors in NMT, maybe it makes a rule out of it that is bad for translation. And as it is black box approach, this is hard to control. So certain errors with unknown words for the engine maybe lead to errors there. But in general, it's a very fluent and good translation, as you may know from your personal experience. Another advantage is you can do NMT bridging here. If you have certain language pairs like Italian English or Hindi English, you just use these language engines. But if you don't have data, for example, for the language pair Italian Romanian, we assume that it is so, you could do another thing. So at first you could do pivoting, which is you translate your source language into English, and then from English into Romanian, if you had enough data for English-Romanian. So this is what Google does a lot. And there's also zero shot. And zero shot, this is a technique which translates between languages it hasn't had data for. So if you have the source language, NMT has an idea of the concepts in the source language, and you have the target language, and it also has ideas for this language. It makes an abstraction here. So I can't go into detail here. It has to do with lots of mathematics and matrix multiplications here, like NMT in general, but this is possible. So let's go to the problems. As we said, it needs lots of data. Maybe you just don't have enough data for your domain. So this is a critical aspect. If you don't have it, how do you get to this data? So MT vendor would say, oh, do back translation here maybe, or maybe do synthetic data by your own somehow, or just produce more data, get it somehow. And also the requirements of NMT regarding hardware are very big. If you want to have it on premise, so in your own house, which is of course secure, you need expensive hardware here. So NMT operates on graphic cards, which are used for gaming usually, but there are special graphic cards now for machine learning and such, and they are very powerful and they are very expensive. And you have to go with the development here, of course. And training time is another factor. In the beginning of NMT, you needed about 7 weeks or so to train an engine. And you can imagine if this engine wasn't good, you have to set your parameters and then train it again, wait 7 weeks. This is very complicated. But MT vendors have come to the point where somehow they managed to lower the training time to about a day or two. I don't know how they do it. It's magic. And as we said, fluency can be very deceptive. So it is perfectly possible that you have a very readable sentence, but you have an eye on the accuracy. Fluency is good, but accuracy is very bad maybe, because it has chosen the wrong concepts here. So this is also possible with SMT, but SMT did not have such a good fluency. So you have to. So our recommendation is here: don't rely on machine evaluation. Rely on human evaluation. If you want to say if an engine operates good on data, make human evaluation. So with people that know their domain. So like you, and you can say if the engine is good or not. And a big problem from the beginning on was terminology integration, because of the black box approach and the representation as vectors. These data is hard to track on its way between all these nodes. You can say, oh, this term is very important, so just send it through the network and it comes out as a certain translation. You can't do this. You could do this with SMT. So you had the tag and it said, oh, please translate this word like this, and the machine has done it. What you can do, to my knowledge, now with NMT systems is named entities that doesn't require so much inflection, so you can use it. But a separate glossary with the right inflection in the target language is very problematic. You can integrate terminology by integrating consistent and correct terminology in your training text. If these are right, then the machine will learn them. But you can't say, here I have my TBX or my glossary and everything's fine. This is not possible. But I'm sure they will find a way. They will find a way, I'm sure. Another problem with NMT are long sentences. So like in German, you have the possibility to use relative sentences a lot. So your sentence grows and grows. Like ein Mann, der gesagt hat, dass ein Hund, der ihm zugelaufen ist, einen Knochen gefunden hat, der einen anderen Mann gehörte, dem ein Hund zugelaufen ist, der einen Knochen gefunden hat. I tried this with DeepL here, and I'm very happy to have produced an error here, which is by now not so easy. This is the input sentence, and the output sentence was this. And this is what you call hallucinating here. So somehow the engine doesn't get it. But I have to do some trials until this error appeared. Usually the engine is very good, I have to admit. Another problem may be that if you use idioms in your language, like the German in den sauren Apfel beißen, English to bite the bullet, the NMT version would be to bite into the acid apple, which is perfectly correct from the MT perspective. And so here you see, if you have like these meaningful sentences, you have to have linguistic and cultural knowledge about, it maybe won't get the right answer here. And as I said, in an MT workflow, you have to do evaluations to optimize systems. And the standard to do evaluations usually are using BLEU, which is comparison of an MT output with a human reference translation. So you have a test set, and there are your human reference translations of a certain text. Then you let the machine translate these texts, and you compare the MT output to the human reference translation. And the more identical words there are in the target sentence, the better it is. The better it is. So there's a comparison. This is somehow problematic because first NMT is not like SMT in its output, and this is because the same meaning can be expressed in different ways. This is also possible with NMT, but more likely to happen in NMT. Give you an example. If you have a sentence like Chancellor Merkel has said, or the translation is Merkel has said, or the Chancellor of Germany said, these are from the meaning side perfectly acceptable, and the meaning is the same. But an automatic metric like BLEU would say, no, this is not good. So we have to find translation metrics that can be applied to NMT here. But this is not a new problem, as it can appear with SMT also. But NMT has a way of, because of this abstraction, it has a understanding somehow of the meaning. Like I told you with the context examples, John likes Maria, John adores. It knows that there is a connection between Chancellor Merkel, Angela, and the like. So you could have different word orders and different terminology for the same meaning in a sentence. If we look at MT at the European Commission, how it is done. Are you using this? Who is using the system? Nobody? What's your experience with it? Yeah? Just want to give you a short view on the history here. It started with the SMT system. It started with the RBMT system, but we start here with the SMT system, which was developed around 2013, I think, and it was trained with Euromis in 24 languages and 552 language pairs, and it was domain specific. And then it switched to e-translation with different technological improvements, and is neural machine translation by now. And there's also, I think, the project will be finished in February of 2019. This is a term bank. This is a term bank for the e-translation platform, where terms are gathered for machine-readable Nmt translation. And I don't know exactly what the status of this is. The tilde is involved there, and the University of Copenhagen, I think. This maybe we will hear about it in the other presentations. And there's a certain feature that is called, or the system IADAATPA. I have to look at the name again. It's called Intelligent Automatic Domain Adapted Automatic Domain Adapted Automated Translation for Public Administrations. And I just want to show you what it is capable of, and this is very interesting because imagine you're a user and you use your cut tool here, and it is integrated with the e-translation system. You send your text to the system with a long name, and there's a domain detection and adaptation routing service. What this does is it detects the domain you are writing in, and then it takes one of the involved systems here to route your text to one of the systems, depending on the domain you're translating in. And this can be on different text levels. It can start with on document level, or you send a page, or a paragraph, or even a line. I think the limit here is 30 words. So this is a very modern approach to MT, the multi-vendor MT, because not every vendor is capable of translating your text in the way you want, because maybe it doesn't have the right data or so. And I don't know the details here, how data from Euromis is not used, but this is a very modern approach to it. So if you talk about the future of NMT, I have asked MT vendors on their opinion of the future of NMT. And of course, they say it will become a standard service, and it will be integrated into everybody's workflow. Everyone's using it, and companies that are ignoring it, will go out of business. Because from a commercial viewpoint, this is reasonable. And also, there's not only neural MT. Neural MT is just one piece of the cake here. There's an AI explosion. Machine learning is used in every aspect of life, and the prediction here is that it will influence also project management, error detection, the job selection. And so this picture yeah, where's the human in this picture, you may ask. So I will keep these questions open to discussion. What's the role of the translator in this NMT world? There will no need to translate anything from scratch. Some have stomach pain now. Yeah, my personal stance on this is that this may be true for certain domains and texts, but as we said before, there are text types or literature I'm convinced that machines can't translate correctly. But on the other side, it enables translators to be very efficient. Like you saw with the LILT system, you can translate very fast. It adapts to your sentence and is predictive in that way. It's very interesting. There's a question on post-editing. You know, if a machine translation isn't as good as you expected, you have to do post-editing. And this is kind of a new working role that has to be established. People begin to find ways how to deal with this problem here. Can a translator be a post-editor? So to our experience, it is if you give an MT to a classic translator, so he will have an eye on very subtle details, and his expectation on the output is the optimal translation because he's used to it. So ask yourself, am I able to do a post-editing here and maybe just let go through some of the errors? Or do I have to learn certain MT errors or learn which MT errors are acceptable and which are not? And am I willing to do this work as a translator? Is it a complete new working role here? These are questions that emerge with NMT. But there's no question that you can with these systems. And there are examples from the industry where NMT is used and it boosts the productivity. If you find the right financial model for it, everyone profits from it. But it has to be, it is between LSPs and the translators, MT vendors. There are new roles, and yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, this is an opinion on the again on the competition in the MT business. If you're an LSP and you don't rely on MT, you will go out of business. But it also yeah, has the possibility to bring new branches of business together, because there could be more yeah, second level, third level industries which have to deal with maybe data cleanup. And this can't be done by one and the same person. You can't do data cleanup and evaluation. There's a huge room for data evaluation, in my opinion, here. So you become a professional evaluator of MT. And so these roles all merge here. You know your domain, you can evaluate this. Maybe you are involved in using guidelines or writing guidelines on controlled language here. I don't think that the translator will be here out of the picture here. So this is my opinion, and this is the MT vendor's opinion here. This is, I told you my opinion. This is now I want to ask you what your opinions are on the things you heard. What are your fears? What do you like? Yeah. Thank you.
Much. Заповядайте.
Now it is the time if you have any questions or comments. For those that are not very well acquainted with our work at the European Commission, I would like to say that we translate mainly from English to our native Bulgarian language, very few French texts and fewer German texts. So the colleagues that are here today, most of us work with English to Bulgarian translation. Therefore, for us, this transition, which has not been completed towards the NMT, is not so exciting. But I know that most for the languages that, in fact, could not use statistical machine translation was in fact a new stage in their professional development. For example, our Hungarian colleagues, our German colleagues, they did not use SMT because it could not deal with the grammar properly. And now the possibility to use the NMT is really a revolutionary step for them. While for the colleagues working with Bulgarian language, they can say more about this maybe in the afternoon sessions. So the comparison between the SMT and the NMT is not so revolutionary. I suppose that most of you also translate, professional translators and interpreters work provide other translations from Bulgarian to other languages, and probably they use the machine translation. And most of you probably use Google. Can we say that Google is machine translation?
So Google is using translation platform, yeah. Тъй, че всеки от вас, който е ползвал Google, е ползвал.
All of you that in fact uses Google is in fact using NMT without knowing it. Do you have any questions, comments, some experiences that you would like to share with us? Now is the opportunity. Have any of you used the platform that was uploaded during the Bulgarian presidency of the Council of Europe? And did you find this platform useful? And please use the microphone so that the interpreters can hear your question and comment. The next presentation is my presentation, so I will take up this question from my experience using the platform for the Bulgarian presidency. Yes, I think the result is a little bit different from the machine translation with respect to the fact that it sounds correct. I don't know whether it is true to the original. Of course, there are sentences, translations that are grammatically correct. Of course, after that, it has to be edited and compared, but this takes less time than for actual translation. Of course, improvements can be made. This platform can speed up the process, but only for certain types of texts. Regarding the criticism of this web application, a lot of journalists commented. They tried to translate a very specific sentence, which even in Bulgarian sounds a little bit funny, and they concluded that this machine translation is useless, it's hopeless. But this, of course, is not true. Because the comments were made by persons who did not know the essence of the machine translation, what should we expect, how to use it, in which cases, and of course that we should not expect a ready product from the machine translation, at least not for the Bulgarian texts. Therefore, this is my personal experience from using this platform. which was especially prepared for the presidency of Bulgaria. Yes, thank you very much. This was the first time I heard about this, and this was widely presented in Bulgaria, that such type of machine translation and this type of platforms exist that can be used, and this type of tools can be used. Of course, this is something new, and every new thing is commented in a different way. In the DG written translation and the future of NMT, the questions on the slide, these are existential questions for our directorate. More than 1,000 translators work in our directorate. What are the trends? Would they be, their number would be the same in the future? What would be their functions in the future, or their number would be reduced? As our director said, it is most prestigious when you are asked what type of persons you hire, not only linguists, but computational linguists, which sounds more prestigious, of course. Our younger participants today, we have students mainly from language departments. Have you used this type of programs and tools and platforms? The question is addressed to the students. Do you have experience with working with this type of programs? If you do not have any questions now, during the coffee breaks and maybe after the last presentation, we can hold a general discussion. So I would like to ask the next lecturer to join us here. This is Professor Valentina Stefanova from the Bulgarian Language Institute of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. I would like to note here that we have excellent cooperation with the Bulgarian Language Institute over the past years concerning our main functions and issues related to grammar and punctuation, some terminology. We have asked the Institute on the Bulgarian language to make certain specifications. In previous years, we were very impatient user of the spelling dictionary, which we expected. And we received information that to expect this dictionary after 3 months and so on. Now every translator has a copy of this dictionary prepared by the Bulgarian Language Institute, and we have always cooperated with them. Now we cooperate with the Institute in the sphere of computer linguistics. So evolution is already a fact. Therefore, the next presentation will be from the people that work on these issues. The first presentation, as I said, is from the Valentina Stefanova, and her presentation is language resources. Thank you very much. The topic which I would like to present is language resources for neural translation. Neural translation is in brackets because, of course, I will present resources of the Institute of the Bulgarian Language and also the resources which we managed to prepare during our work for the automated translator for the Bulgarian presidency. In fact, these are language resources which assist translation services, interpretation services for the systems that use automated translation. The method for automated translation are various. We we enjoyed the wonderful presentation of the previous speaker. I would like to note here, as the previous lecturer said, that there is a large amount of data. both for statistical machine translation and the NMT. How can we achieve good machine translation? Of course, this is by training and by experience, as in human beings. So we need a large amount of data, which has to be high-quality data. So the more data we have, available data, the better data we have, the better the translation. Of course, the quality of the translation is very important. So the machine translation, of course, has to be to be in compliance with the terminology and the topic of the translation. And then we have certain keywords, constructions, sentence constructions. What are, in fact, language resources? This is the language material, the collection of statements written or verbal. They are then formed in a corpus of language examples presented in such a way that can be computer processed. Very quickly, I would pass over some of the applications prepared by the institutes that are useful for translators. The first one is the Bulgarian National Corpus, and this contains more than 240,000 texts and 47 parallel language corpuses. The shortcut of the web page, the search tool, you can search by word, you can search by phrase, by various categories, or by metadata. Also, we have WordNet for the Bulgarian language. It contains more than 120,000 synonyms. This is just a short screen of this WordNet platform. You have a search box by words, and then you have links to the vectors, synonyms, domains. You have Bulgarian and English. You can make parallels between the two languages. We have added 22 other languages to the Bulgarian WordNet, so parallels could be made with French, Finnish, Spanish, etc. The other very freely accessible resources, this is the dictionary of the Bulgarian language, the information portal Infolex, for synonyms, antonyms, phraseologies, and new words. Dictionary, also LexIt dictionary portal. You can search simultaneously in 12 dictionaries. Also, we have a grammar dictionary, spelling dictionary, etc. All these dictionaries are freely accessible and can be downloaded. On the site for coordination of the European language services, there is a platform, sharing platform, and you can access 3 terminology dictionaries, one in the economics sphere, legal sphere, and information technologies. They're also freely available and can be downloaded. What the quality of the language resources, on what does it depend? Foremost, on the objective. For example, for the machine translation that we prepared for the purposes of the presidency of Bulgaria of the Council of Europe, we collected official documents. Then we collected press coverages, press releases, and general information. The language resources that we used were examples of good translation for training of the machine translator, also language data and large corpus data collected by the internet. with suitable, previously selected suitable web pages. Tilde developed the interpreter, which was prepared especially for the Bulgarian presidency under the Initiative for Connectivity of Europe. So this instrument, this tool, is a multi-language communicator. It provides automated translation. It manages the 24 official languages of the European Union using the e-translation platform. Also, Nmt translation is being used here, and machine training. It fully utilizes the context of a given sentence in order to provide a more clear and fluent translation, which is most close to the translation made by a human being. This is the shortcut of the system itself and the internet address. The next presentation would acquaint us in greater detail on this platform, so I would not dwell anymore on this. As I mentioned already, we had to collect a huge amount of data. And foremost, we automatically collected text from the internet, and we discovered information for automated collection of data. Also, classification of texts which are suitable for the specific topic, style, and genre. Also, information about the authors, titles, date of publication, etc. The technologies used for this type of data extraction was from different program products on the internet and different text processing programs and data extraction programs from the internet. The strategy used for news data extraction is predominantly from the different sites and from the internet environment and RSS subscriptions. These are programs for exchange of news between different sites. The resources that we prepared under this task were corpus for Bulgarian, news in Bulgarian, news in English concerning the presidency, and correspondingly news in English and news in English for the presidency. We used different sources to extract data covering the past couple of years. The other corpus that we established was English news created in Bulgaria about the presidency, and also filtered news in English language from Bulgaria, extracted from various sources in Bulgaria. The processing of the collected information was done through automated separation of the sentences. We used packages for preliminary linguistic processing, and the programs are BGLPC and Core NLP. We transformed the text into JSON format containing metadata about the source, the date of creation, date of extraction, and so on 185 thematic topics. The resources that we created automatically, so the Bulgarian news, but the news in Bulgarian, they contain more than 33 million sentences. And the Bulgarian, the news about the presidency in Bulgarian language are around 700,000. The news in English from Bulgaria are more than 800,000, and the news in English about the presidency in Bulgaria are approximately 20,000 sentences, and the filtered news in English from Bulgaria are a little above 200,000 sentences. Another interesting task that we encountered during the preparation of the automated translation for the Bulgarian presidency is the subcorpus for parallel documents from different spheres. Also, a text subcorpus for normalized parallel data for the general news, and a similar subcorpus for news dedicated on the presidency of the Council of Europe. And the last subcorpus was about literary and fictional materials. The documents from the different spheres, which were prepared in parallel, they were done by automated summarizing of all the documents collected from the Bulgarian English information corpus, part of the Bulgarian national corpus, in the following spheres: economy, culture, defense, politics, and a more general corpus, which includes psychology and philosophy. The files, as you can see, which were prepared in parallel and reviewed in advance with the sentences for each of these spheres. For example, for the economy sphere, we checked 242 files about the language sentences. More than 1,000 files, 10,000 files were checked for quality. The procedure for the preparation of this parallel corpus, foremost, was the manual check for preliminary elimination of any discrepancies in the text in both languages. And then the automated preliminary processing, separation of the sentences, the separation of the tokens and the packages. Also, the same platforms were used. This is a very small example of a sentence which has been preliminarily separated in the different items. In the third column is the legitimization, and the fourth column is the assigning of targets for each of the word. The next procedure was the automated correlation of the sentences, adding the Bulgarian dictionaries, also the personal names dictionary lists, so that this instrument can be useful in Bulgarian. We used also the Moses machine translation instrument, and finally the manual correction and check in order to provide high quality of the resources. The correlation of the sentences was done in 3 different ways. Ratio 1:1, which is the perfect option, 1 Bulgarian sentence to correlate to 1 English sentence. The next option is 1 Bulgarian sentence to correlate to 2 Bulgarian sentences, and this is a well-known practice for translators. For example, 2 sentences to be joined into 1 or vice versa, or 2 Bulgarian sentences to correspond to 1 English sentence. Or, for example, if the English sentence is too long to be separated into 2 Bulgarian. However, we ascertained that the texts themselves contain some sort of extra symbols, we quote them. And based on this, for the extraction of the text from the internet, such control symbols are left there, and redundant symbols. every symbol has to represent a sentence for Bulgarian and English text. As you can see here, the sentence is divided into 3 lines, and this had to be made manually for all the sentences that were incorrectly separated to remove these redundant symbols. This was done manually. Another correction which had to be made after parentheses, when there is a space, the system recognizes as the end of the sentence, and incorrectly the 2 sentences were separated. This is the case here on this slide. So therefore, we had to correct all the documents manually and to correct such mistakes and to upload them manually, the sentences. Another example for a similar mistake, after not always the system could recognize the full stop and the parentheses as the end of the sentences, so this had to be done manually as well. Another procedure that we used for the processing of the corpuses, we extracted them manually from the internet, from the text of the internet. In fact, the finding of such texts and finding sites containing parallel text, both in Bulgarian and English, was done manually. Also, manual check and correction of the collected texts. Then the automated processing followed, and automated assessment of the parallel texts, and finally the manual check and correction if there were some mistakes. There were a few mistakes in order to improve the quality of the translation. The main criteria for this task was the text not to be parallel, but to be the translation to be most accurate. That's why we had to normalize the parallel text. That's why we established these principles for normalization of the text. For example, the relations between words, phrases, simple sentences, complex sentences, the same number of paragraphs in the Bulgarian and English texts, and so on. Then we conducted a number of activities for the normalization of the parallel text to delete some of the information, whether some sentences or parts of the sentences or separate words or paragraphs. For example, if in Bulgarian text there are only 2 paragraphs, but in the English there are 3 paragraphs, then we had to eliminate 1 paragraph from the English text. Separation of the sentences, which I explained previously, the sentences ratio 1:1 or 2:1 or 1:2. We decided to separate the sentences or to unite them so that the data can be as accurate as possible. Distribution of the information among these sentences, editing of the simple sentences as part of the complex one. This predominantly in the Bulgarian text, because we decided that the Bulgarian text was the main text, so that's why it had to be corrected and edited. Abbreviations, they had to be written in fully in both languages, and the abbreviations had to be identical in both languages. Also the names, personal names, titles, names of organizations. This type of editing was done also for the English text as well, not only for the Bulgarian. This is an example of normalization of general news. The beginning of the English sentence, in fact, is missing in the Bulgarian text, so we decided to edit the verb. We have a quite free translation, but because we want to be accurate, we translated it more accurately. Then we deleted the parts that are missing in the English text, some phrases or separate words. Another example, the first part of the sentence, once again, was different. The translation was a little bit more free. We want to be more accurate, so that's why we edited the translation into English. Another example is this is the principle of separation of sentences. We divided the Bulgarian sentence in order to correspond to the two sentences in the English language. We added the ear as well. The example in the English text, we have added the adjective, and which is information which could be added, in fact, to prevent too much editing of the English text. One thing which is common for all three examples, that we delete this part of the translation which is not completely accurate. And by doing so is that the translated text is not a bad translation, but our goal, objective, was to train the system to be as accurate as possible. So this is why we conducted these corrections, so-called normalization of the text. The volume of the text corpus concerning the general news, we checked 161 files per language, and more than 3,000 sentences were checked. The news concerning the Bulgarian presidency, the parallel files per language were more than 130 and more than 3,000 sentences. And concerning fiction and scientific literature, as you see, the volume of this corpus is very small, because this corpus, we developed this corpus for the presentation of the system in February, organized by the Ministry for the Bulgarian Presidency. And the objective of these files, this corpus, is to compare the results which the system provides for the translation of news connected to the presidency or fiction. And because our main objective was to train the machine about translating documents related to the presidency, that's why, of course, the corpus for this type of news is much larger than fiction. And the summary, we managed to establish corpuses, specialized and parallels for the different language models. And we also established parallel corpuses for Czech, also corpus for in Bulgarian and English for official documents. And on my own behalf and on behalf of the team of colleagues that works on the preparation of these documents, I would like to thank you for your attention. Now you have the floor if you want to ask any questions.
Maybe the colleagues that will speak in the afternoon will add further. I just want to clarify, as Mr. Aizold was referring to Euramis database, maybe it's worth mentioning. This is the database that is used by the translator in the European institutions, that our texts are aligned, the original and translation. And these are segments, as they call them here, and these segments are used for training of all the machines STM, we have a translator that finishes with their translation. As soon as they close the documentation, their aligned, normalized documentation are sent to this database Ramis. And in the best case, this ends, all the segments are saved for future reference. In the cases when for some reason the text was not aligned, it's done by our assistants that are doing the alignment of the translation. Maybe you can stay here with us here so we can finish, all of us, at the end. Any questions? Now or later? Okay, let's leave the discussion for the end. The last presentation before lunch is Elica Horozova by Sofita Agency. I'm interested in to see how many users of SDL Studio we have here. And there is a line that's very modest and quiet, because in our system, SDL Studio is embedded. It's our main working instrument in the Commission. And I always remember of a friend of mine who was a professional interpreter, philologist, who told me, like many years ago, when she graduated philology and she started as interpreter, and she got a horoscope, and she was told that the horoscope was that she will work with instruments and technique, and she was laughing. But right now her position sounds like responsible for the technologies in the language department where she's working, so she understood 20 years later that her horoscope was completely right. So all the interpreters with us, they become more and more, the requirements towards them for their information IT knowledge are higher and higher, and it's very interesting the current students, whether they graduate with this training. Yes? Okay. So we can move to the SDL Studio. Hi everyone, my name is Elica, and I worked since 22 years in the translation agency Sofita. I'm completely unprofessional in terms of algorithms and technologies of creating of machines for MT. I'm also not a linguist, but for all these years I had, by organizing and providing this kind of service for translation, to face different technologies and text and relationship with interpreters and machines and people. Thus, it won't be such a detailed presentation of this software addition, as the colleague before me mentioned. I just will show you how it's used and several examples for results that we received from it. This addition, this plugin, to say it in a simple Bulgarian language, it's developed by Tude, which is a Latvian company working on developing MT programs. In order to work with SDL Trados Studio, you can use this translating machine. This is how it looks, the link from when you can download the plugin. After you install it, you can see at the bottom, you can see it's added in the software, and when you select the memory, you can use the translation machine for automatic translation, or the translation memory that has human translations there, not machine translation. After you select the plugin, there are several options that you can use. You can see at the bottom the option before last. It depends how detailed the memory is, whether it can use the automatic translation when there are no matches in the memory, or they should not be used. When you start translating, you can choose whether to use the machine translation or not, whether it can enter the empty line, or automatically you can choose, or you can choose by yourself how adequate it is. In terms of the title, I want to say something that always the new things are some kind of revolution. And over all those years at the beginning, when we started to work with cuts, there was a fear from us, from the client, from the translator, from the clients. Is this a translation? Is it done by the machine or by a human? Even the first program I used for computer cuts, it was under DOS operation system. And after that, Trados came. It had dongles. They were big. Then they became USB and much smaller. Slower, we got used with them. After that, we couldn't live without them. So I suppose that this is forthcoming with the Nmt. First, it's a revolution. We're all afraid of it. What will happen? Why? Does it have to happen? Of course, thanks to the brave people, this fear is overcome, and from then on you can start with the evolution and further building up an improvement of this machine, so they're not our enemy, but they can be of use for us. So we don't have to contradict people towards machine, but somehow to meet them together. Not to oppose them, but to meet them. At the beginning, with the computer-supported machine, which has nothing to do with the MT, machine translation, there was also this fear, that this is done by a translation done by machine. We said this to our clients. They said, no, we want a normal translation. And we said, this is a normal translation. It's just different from humans. What you put in the machine, it stays there. You can always relate to it. And with the humans, it's different. We put them in our machine, but we cannot call them all the time or ever. Thus, I wanted to say that this is a translation done by a human, and we also hope that it's done by a smart human, because there are cases where this phrase, it's done by machine, it's overexploited. We send a translation to somebody, and the client decides that translation is not so good and they don't like it, and they say, no, this is a machine translation. This is something when I hear, I just get crazy, because not all translations are good, and the fact that they're made by humans, it doesn't mean they're good. It's not a machine translation, it's just a translation that's not so good, but it's a favorite phrase used by our clients. When they don't like something, they say it's a machine translation. The translation done by tool, it's a translation done by a human, and the machine translation is a translation done by a machine. At this stage, or at this stage of the evolution, we need to know, all of us, that what we receive as a translation from the machines, regardless whether it's SMT, NMT, or whatever, this, for now, is not equal, it's not from the same quality to the translation done by humans. Although in some cases there are better matches, better hits, we always have to question what we receive as a result, depending, of course, of our goal. If we want to understand the text, what it means, or just to find our way around, the machine translation is quite good. The web application for the European presidency can be used. so people can find their way around, like a state service, whether this text is applicable for them or no. However, when we speak about providing a service for translation, or this translation will be published and it should be a ready-made product, then the translation has to be edited. Because, as colleagues said before me, with the NMT especially, this was revolution for me, truly. When we receive a result, a translated sentence, it sounds good. It sounds on the same language, grammatically correct. The gap that you can see, how much it's equal with the original. The fact that it sounds good doesn't mean that it applies to the ingoing text, the input text. We can always use the machine translation to receive a raw product, which afterwards to be processed in such a way that it becomes a ready product, and to just quicken the time of work. This plugin I spoke about, this software plugin, where do we meet machine translation with the CATOs and with the humans? This is an example of this meeting. We put the plugin, we put the automatic translation in the CATO, and the human processes the results for me. This is something that is very convenient, because using translator memory with segments that are translated by human are approved in order to get into the system, and combining this memory with the automatic translation, things happen in this way. The priority always has, the memory has that, and the matches with the memory have the priority, and of course the terminology database that has been developed as a dictionary, and the automatic translation that can assist with the segments or sentences that don't have available translation, and afterwards they're edited. What is convenient is that, and you will see this later how it's done, when the automatic translation is used, there are indications that automatic translation has been used, and there is also an indication in the program if this automatic translation was edited or not. Meaning that if somebody decides to check and to see there are places the automatic translation was not edited, and they're distrusting about the person who did this, of course, they can check these segments that were not edited. But most likely they were left unedited because the automatic translation gave a result that was good enough. Okay. I apologize to the interpreters if I speak too quickly. This is how a text looks like. These are paragraphs that I took from a real-life translation from our agency for DGT. However, it's from Bulgarian to English. We have the original text. Apparently, there is no match in the memory database. And in the field, the suggestion is given done by the machine for automatic translation, for machine translation. We choose to use these suggestions done by the machine, and we end up with this. In the column that is between the two texts, you can see AT, which means automatic translation or machine translation. It's clear that the translation in these segments has been taken by the machine. As a result, I made this automatic translation and I added the real translation done by the human, so you can see the comparison. The first segment is an illustration that the sentence is right, correct, it's correct by itself, but it's not true compared to the content of the original. Thus, it needs editing, and the editing that needs is the yellowed spaces, not even the last one, because it's different from the human translation, but it's not wrong. And now it's a question of choice. The second sentence, it's quite short, but regardless, what the machine provides is identical to what the human has written, the translator had done. The next sentence also needs editing, and you see the yellowing parts. If this is, of course, was uploaded before, in advance, we save time for writing 5 words. I want to say that from one side, there is this fear that where the creativity in the translation profession goes. From the other side, you know, as interpreters and translators, and as a person that works in an agency, that when we are pressured with deadlines and with the amount of text we need to translate, there are moments where there is no space for creativity, or it's biased by all the references that we need to make of the name of the legislation, how it's translated, where is what translated. And at the same time, a specific text needs to be translated for a limited amount of time, how to put it. It doesn't sound like as enough time for creativity. Here, I think we can use what the technologies can offer in order to be effective, quick when we have to. And of course, I believe that there will be place for creativity, but in the post-editing and editing, you can also be creative, and I hope that the machines won't start translating poetry, so there is space for creative personalities who never want to touch machines, although they most likely will translate it on computer, which is another machine anyway. In the next sentences here, because we have abbreviations in the original, the third sentence, the machine hasn't recognized it, and it's something that is not true. But here in this sentence, the editing is only in this abbreviation of this legislation name, which needs to be changed, and then the result from the machine translation, just changing by a title, becomes acceptable, and it looks like done by the human. In the last sentence, which is longer, and what I can see, what I've heard about the Nmt, the longer the sentence, it's not the example as our colleague gave with a German sentence, but the more context you have, the greater the chance the translation to be adequate and correct. In the last sentence, which includes the title of the GDPR, the famous GDPR, you can see that the translator, the machine has done an adequate translation. There was only one difference, and this difference from the human translation, it's not doesn't carry any meaning, or it's not incorrect, so it can stay as it is. So this paragraph, that maybe it will take quite a lot of minutes for the interpreter, and whether it's equal to the time to just read it and not to change anything, that I think that here time wins in terms of automatic translation. We did an experiment a while ago, maybe one of the companies who's working at machine translation. We sent several translations to translate a text and to edit in real time, automatic translation to judge how much time compared the post-editing with the time that the translator translates, because it was from English to Bulgarian and the topic was specific, it was computer area, and the results were not good for the post-editing. But it was more than 6 years ago, even more maybe. And I can see that the things changed since then a lot. After we do the automatic translation, there was the time comes for the post-editing, and it's a profession and a job that needs I'm not sure in what direction it will go, but it will continue to exist and to develop further, and there will be space for such people that will be focused on post-editing, especially when you start offering this service, because I wouldn't say that machine translation has been offered in Bulgaria. We made an experiment with a client that came, and they said, I want this text that was on Bulgarian. It was a contract for a rent to be translated in English. It has to be done immediately. I have a meeting with the broker. We cannot do this immediately because we need technical time to do this, but we said we can do machine translation for you. You will understand what it means, but there might be things that are misleading or incorrect. And he said, no, goodbye. So people are afraid of machine translation, but it's how you present the information and to what extent it will be explained to the client, what is the machine translation, what are the risks, are there any risks, so that it can be offered as a service, because as I know in the US they have translation agencies that just offer this as a service, and it's at the same is equal to the human translation, of course, at a lower price. If we use a good translation machine and we use it in the right way and in the right area, of course, not to translate cosmetic products with machine translation created for the Bulgarian presidency, this won't work. We have two options of post-editing. I've shown them here in pictures. And in case the post-editing that might happen is what you see as editing. If we had done this several paragraphs with automatic translation, this would be the editing that might be needed for the text to be finalized. Here, you can see in this column that is between the input and output sentences, where we put AT, that is not edited. After the automatic translation, there was no editing. It's in blue, and the others that are edited are in white. So it's easy to see what texts were edited and the ones that are not. Soon, again, we had a client, translate an agency in abroad. We send the translated text, but because we send it and the file were done in CAT tool, there were XLIF files. They saw that the translator used machine translation, and they code to say that this is not right, that they didn't pay for such service. They don't agree with this service. We didn't even know that the interpreter used this type of translation. The person was connected to their CAT tool, a machine for automatic translation, and they use it, and why not? And the translation was reviewed and edited and retranslated, and the result was satisfying. Here, after the results have been accepted, the editing results, you can see at the bottom, where you can see where CM is. The text comes out from the memory. So if I start retranslating this, it won't, the automatic translation won't pop up. What will come up was what was already approved, and it's already introduced into the memory. There will always be, of course, priority of the human translation. So my opinion, if we use in the right way the machines, the technologies, and the people, and the right people, I think that we can achieve much better results, and we cannot stop the development anyway. It's us humans who created these machines and these technologies. I believe that this is our path forward. I suppose you're hungry, so that's everything from me. And an automatic translation of do you have questions without post-editing on different languages. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please join us here. In the Blade Runner, the robots were so integrated into the human society, they were not sure whether they're robots or not. They were trying to find through their memories from their childhood whether it's real memory or it was implanted when they were programmed. So our translation today, they need to be analyzed specifically to see what came from old segments, what's a machine translation, and where is the adjustments from the interpreter, the translator. Questions, comments, personal experiences, you're welcome. Maybe the lectors this morning would like to comment something after you heard all the presentations so far.
Hello. This is what we see when we talk to translators using MT. There's a need for classifying these post-editing work that has to be done, and to know and to differentiate between adjusting, which is acceptable MT, just to give you knowledge about a certain aspect, and MT for production, and that you can predict which amount of work has to be done on which MT output, and is it predictable, and to which amount post-editing has to be done. You can do a classification there. So that makes it easier to give an idea to the post editors, what they should do. And the second aspect is maybe the one of security here. If a person gives you data with personal data, of course, this person should know if you use an MT engine or not. So in the GDPR, it is very important to know if machine translation is used and if a cloud service is used. If MT is internal, it's okay. But normally you would say, okay, I'm using MT, so you should know this. I don't know what was the problem with your customer there. If it was just the fact that you used MT, or if it's a security issue.
No, it wasn't a security issue because it was a public text, so there weren't any personal data or whatsoever. So it was just that they didn't accept the idea that someone has used an MT, and they doubted the quality. And this was the only issue they had. Although we reassured them a couple of times that it's edited by human, and it's a translation of a good quality.
Да, се зарадвах до някъде като
I was happy to a certain extent when I heard Mrs. Horozova, because I shared that this was my concern in the previous years, to speak about MT and to what extent we use it in our translation, because we speak about mistakes in translation, Bulgarian grammar. So we believe that it's not the right moment to mention that, well, why use an MT, and it's parts, it was integrated in part of our translations. But today we don't have a choice. This is our present. And recently, the last translator retired in our GD. That's translated verbally. They were speaking their translation, and somebody was writing them down. And the next stage, after typing the text, and after that we used voice recognition programs that exist for many languages, and this was our last interpreter, and I understood from his colleagues. He was an excellent translator and very productive, so we can't even say that the modern technologies increased the production level, because the excellent translator there completely can be matched, despite that other people use cut tool and machine translation. A very good professional, as in terms of productivity, is perfectly compatible with the people who use the modern technologies. Yes, but not, we don't speak about repeating text and sequence of terminology. Then, at least I believe that a live person cannot, if we have 100% match in the memory, in the MT, and in 5 pages that will download it in a couple of seconds, there is no live person could identify them that they are the same and to reproduce them in 5 minutes. You cannot even make a comparison here. Questions? I was interested when we spoke about post-editing. My question, maybe the representative of the translator agency, how we can make a distinction of human translation and post-editing. When I give document for translation, I expect this to be translated. I don't care if it's empty or not. Is there some tendency to offer different quality of translation, a difference between the translation done completely by human or just post-editing of MT? No. I wouldn't distinguish the service from neither from a quality or money perspective. If we decide or we judge that the text is good for MT and post-editing, we wouldn't notify the client in this case, because we don't know if the post-editing and the person who has to do the MT, how much time it took them, whether it won't be the same, and the quality would have been the same, equal. So that's why we wouldn't provide this information to the client, how the translation was done. And I don't think that there should be difference in the quality. What Christian mentioned, however, in terms of quality and the post-editing, if we have to distinguish the service between translation done by the person and done by a machine plus post-editing, as we as agency, if we decide to offer this different service, there might be difference in quality and in style, and there are maybe some nuances, because we'll have a translator who would ask, to remove the mistakes, not to make the translation the way they would have done it, which is different. And it doesn't always mean it's worse quality. It's more like the average level, but it depends on the text. If we just list things, or just the terminology has to be correct and there is no creative activity, maybe it won't make a difference. But if it's a post-editing, just to remove mistakes, not to improve the text as the way of the fluency and the relativity of the language, or there is a specific style, because people, the translators, they deal with the text and the specific area. In the text and the topic, they also take into account the requirements from the client, which are specific for the client. For example, they might want that the text is translated not in a polite form, but in an everyday language, because their target audience is a specific one. They want the tone of the text, so to speak, to be more aggressive. Here, of course, we apply creativity, which cannot be expected from the machine. In this case, you can make a distinction. I haven't heard so far someone in Bulgaria to offer and to distinguish services in this way, because even we are familiarizing with the possibilities of MT and what work we have to input afterwards to make this product ready. And also, to what client can we offer this? Because a translation is good when it's done its job, not when I like it or when you like it. You might not need a brilliant translation. You might need only to be familiarized with an instruction or something. And some people They need to sound great.
Рекламно и така нататък, така че наистина много са аспектите и предполагам, съм сигурна, че в един момент ще се предлага и машинен превод, което не означава, че няма да има пост-едитинг при него, но вероятно пост-едитинга ще бъде да установи доколко е верен превода с оригинала и да отстрани грешки, примерно езикови, граматически, а не да добавя стил или нали, човешки тач, така да се каже.
Благодаря ви.
Благодаря. Klaus, you wanted to...
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to thank all three speakers for their very interesting presentations. Having listened for the umpteenth time on how Nmt really works, I slowly start to understand the magic behind it. I was very pleased to hear that Mr. Aizold kind of confirmed my own impressions about the future we are facing and the trends that are developing. For the second presentation, thank you very much for showing us so impressively the hard work that is behind producing good corpora, quality corpora, which are a precondition for building good machines. And I was really impressed about the amount of manual input that you have to do. So I was wondering about the size and the timeline of the size of your team and how much time you used for that. The third presentation I liked very much because it shows the practical application, but I have a technical question. I was a bit surprised to see the title of the regulation translated by machine translation. And there was only one word that had to be edited. So what I don't understand here now is, was this an Nmt translation from scratch, or was it a corrupted translation memory? Because does the Nmt recognize the pattern that stands behind the sort of titles?
This is what I did. I just put the original in the string, and then I got the empty suggestion, and I put it. And it was only this word, which, by the way, doesn't need to be changed in that particular case. So it was
spot on.
A human translation in some sense. A human equal translation.
Yeah, human parity. Thank you.
И въпросът да...
Не знам дали се чува. Така като време, може би около 7 или 8 месеца работихме. Екипът се състоеше от 4-ма, 2-ма лингвисти, аз и моя колежка, също главен асистент към института, и 2-ма програмисти. Един основно се занимаваше с автоматичното извличане на документи, а другия с автоматичното съотнасяне, подравняване и оценката към самите документи, които създадохме паралелно. Само 4 души.
4 човека за 8 месеца, 7-8 месеца.
Там някъде от към септември миналата година до към май месец тази година работихме основно. И да, отне доста време неочаквано и за нас.
Не, то отнема време, да. Благодаря ви. И аз искам да благодаря на всички лектори. Наистина беше много интересно и винаги е полезно да преговорим, дори ако знаем какво или си мислим, че знаем какво е невромашинния превод, за да разберем по-добре какви трябва да бъдат нашите очаквания, защото без да знаеш, нали, какво. Аз по-рано, нали, това беше пак, както каза Клаус, нали, беше много отдавна, но 90-те години беше модерно, нали, когато получаваш някакъв резултат, това компютъра го направи, това компютъра го изчисли, да, но ако програмата е калпава, естествено, че резултата е калпав, но това беше, нали, обяснение, ако имаш някакви претенции, нали, това компютъра го направи. Ето, заповядайте. Само микрофона да дадете.
Аз искам да направя един кратък коментар. Аз бях от тези скептичните към машинния превод, защото много пъти предишни години на тази конференция сме говорили за мултиплицирането на грешката. Когато влезе по някакъв начин един термин, той продължава да се мултиплицира в други преводи. Но като се замислих реално върху нещата преди много години, когато нямаше машинен превод, дадох мои документи да се превеждат. преводач, който превежда с човек, да, човек, не машина. И мога да ви кажа, че превода беше умопомрачителен. Когато го погледнах, трябваше да се препреведе, за да може да се легализира. Така че не би трябвало да се страхуваме от машината, защото човека не е гаранция, че човек ще направи по-добър превод.
Благодаря ви. Искам да кажа, че нашите тестове с невромашинния превод разкриха нови простори за грешки, защото статистическия машинен превод позволяваше да ползваме нашите терминологични бази, които градихме дълги години. Продължаваме да градим всъщност във всяка нова област или за всеки нов термин, докато невромашинният превод не е толкова податлив, или поне до сега не беше толкова податлив на всякакви обучения и намеси. И затова той генерира собствени грешки и особено забавно за нови думи, нови термини, които той не е срещал. Тъй, че простор за творчеството има и простор за нови грешки също.
Да, но когато се обедини всъщност терминологичните бази и когато се използва, нали, т.е. комбинацията от CAT-тула с автоматичния превод, нали, дори автоматичният превод да не е отчел определените термини, които са установени, накрая при проверките за качество, където се сравнява, нали, т.е. дали термина е преведен така, както е заложен в терминологичната база, пак автоматично тези грешки могат да бъдат идентифицирани и поправени бързо, нали, така че имаме някаква комбинация от решения в случая.
Заповядайте. Може ли микрофона тук пред?
Здравейте, моят въпрос е насочен чисто технологично към изчислителната мощност, която трябва да се направи, примерно малка Nmt машина, и дали са на разположение такива файлове и бази данни, които от Българския институт, нали, тук обясниха. Чисто финансова и технологична гледна точка, колко изчислителна мощност трябва да се отдели за изграждането на нещо малко, примерно, не е такова голямо, както големите мрежи. Благодаря.
Hello. Yeah, it depends. The first step is it depends on the what the framework needs. But I think these differences are not so important. There are systems where you can use about one graphics card and where you can run around 10 engines, so 10 language directions. But the question is, how do you want to route your service? And how many translations do you want to provide in the same time? So you can provide more translations with one card or one system, but if you want to train systems, this is the critical point. If you want to train simultaneously, you need more cards. So I think if you just want to translate about 5 to 10 language pairs and not simultaneously all the time, it would be sufficient to have a standard server architecture with a good graphics card. So up-to-date top graphics card. No? They are around between 1,000 and 2,000 euros maybe. But they get cheaper the more these machine learning techniques become prominent. They are prominent, and there are special hardwares for it. There may be hardwares in a much higher price range, I don't know, but they are just for the big companies. I think they use proprietary stuff. But you can, as an end consumer, you could do it. So if you have certain amounts of money for it.
Един въпрос отзад.
Здравейте, може би като допълнение на този отговор,
Има голяма разлика между това дали тренираме невронната мрежа или всъщност очакваме някакви предикшени от нея. И за самото трениране, то е доста по-тежка операция. И съответно, нали, има различни начини, по които може да се направи. Могат да се вземат, може да се тренира в клауда и след това да се превежда на по-слаба система. Също така, зависи колко бързо искаме да се случи всичко. Може да тренирането да бъде на по-малки, т.е. една епоха в тренирането на невронна мрежа е минаването на всички примери през модела. Ние тази епоха може да я минем с нещо, което се нарича batch size, който е от различен размер. Т.е. може да подаваме на модела различна част от тренировъчните примери наведнъж, което съответно доста ще от към време ще се увеличи времето за трениране, но като цяло машина потребителска днешна, нормална, купена днес, може би с 8 гигабайта RAM и с нормален процесор би свършила работа за трениране на една невронна мрежа. Като не е нужна видеокарта, процесорите се справят доста добре. Да, всички операции, които фактически се вършат по време на тренирането, са векторни и затова графичните карти се справят толкова добре, но като цяло и процесорът върши работа. Така че да, ако имате достатъчно време, може да натренирате невронна мрежа и prediction реално е доста по-лека операция.
А за колко време ще стане това трениране?
Зависи от размера данни. Сега мога да дам конкретен пример с конкретна платформа, но да речем, че говорим за дни.
Да, в рамките на няколко дена, да.
Да, като говорим за стотици хиляди примери.
Ясно. Да, благодаря ви. Други въпроси? Или нашите невронни мрежи имат нужда от презареждане, тогава момента е за обед. Ние ще продължим в 13:45, като ще помоля двамата лектори на този панел да дойдат в един, нали така? Нали съм права? 1:45. Продължаваме, ще помоля двамата лектори да дойдат на сцената, ако така може да я наречем. Много ви благодаря на всички и страхотно.